This is Invisible Inc., the podcast for under-resourced women entrepreneurs. And I'm your host, Shubha Chakravarti, founder of Achieve. In this podcast, I talk to women entrepreneurs at every stage of their journey about the challenges, the highs, the lows, and what they've learned along the way. We'll also hear from experts who share valuable tips on how to succeed the smart way. Let's jump in. You've seen the numbers, the minuscule amount of funding that goes to women-founded businesses, the uphill battles, the struggle. But what if you could turn the whole conventional model on its head and make fundraising a lot less like the Hunger Games and much more like getting an unexpected banquet? In this episode, Vicki Saunders, activator and founder of SheEO, now Coralus, talks about the inspiration behind SheEO's unique model for funding, her vision of helping women entrepreneurs tackle the world's to-do list, how getting access to the right community can supercharge your venture, and much more. Now here's Vicki. Thank you for joining us today, Vicki. We're just delighted to have you. You're one of our very special guests. So first off, you've had a very interesting journey all the way from activator to energy and now to SheEO. What was the guiding spark that helped you move from youth and entrepreneurship into women and entrepreneurship?
I think I've basically been doing the same thing over and over again, all the way through, which is I'm very interested in how you create the conditions in an environment for people to thrive. My thing that I'm most interested in is innovation in business as to help solve some of the major challenges we're facing. So that's the container, but the larger sort of thread through everything I've ever done. I was in Prague in the Czech Republic when the wall fell down. And it was just so formative to witness myself and how I acted in that environment, which was all about you're now free. Who are you going to be? Everybody dreaming. Anything was possible was the mindset of the culture at the moment. And I just noticed myself being very different in that environment. And so part of it is like, how do you recreate that environment in other places? How do you create the conditions for people to thrive? So I've been experimenting with that in multiple different ways across many different demographics and approaches for a long time.
And the thing that specifically sparked the interest in women entrepreneurs, was there any one thing or was it just a natural progression?
I actually avoided this my whole life. Did not want to do anything women only because I'm totally conditioned. I'm like in my 50s, and anything women only in our formative years was considered not interesting. Small, oh, it's a woman thing, doesn't matter, sidebar. And I wanted to be part of the mainstream success because I was conditioned, that's what you need to do. But no matter who you are as a woman, if you show up in these systems that are designed by men for men, it's like, you're done. It's not going to work. And we see it everywhere, 2% of CEOs, 2% of whatever's. So it took me a long time to get over myself and to go like, actually, this really, really, really does matter. And we need to go, and then to figure out how to hack that. So it's the last thing that I got to. And I'm like very boy inside, like super conditioned testosterone. And so I've done a lot of healing of my feminine side by starting SheEO.
That resonates quite a bit. And for those of us that aren't as familiar, can you just give a very quick overview of the exact funding model of SheEO? It's very different from the traditional financing.
Yeah. So it comes at things really from an ecosystem perspective. And it's my belief that money alone doesn't solve anything. You can throw money at things and it just doesn't really transform. And I'm very much interested in transforming what the conditions look like for all of us to thrive, but women in particular. And so the model is using crowdfunding, essentially. So hundreds of women in a country would come together, contribute a small amount of capital, pooled together. And then that whole group would go online to vote. So totally democratized, selecting where the money should go. And the money is divided up by the number of ventures that are funded each year. We have roughly a model of $100,000 per venture-ish. And it's a 0% interest loan, which is paid back in 20 equal payments over 5 years. So it's not just a one-time lump sum at the end, you're paying all the way through. So it really is the right kind of funding for ventures with recurring revenue, not for tech-funded ventures that need a ton of money, all that. Like it's debt financing. And then the money, as it's paid back each quarter, is like accumulated and it's loaned out again. So we have the money is constantly sort of rotating forward in a perpetual fund.
And what gave you the idea for this unique model? There's so many different types of funding. Where did it come from?
I have no idea. I'm a synthesizer. So I looked at all kinds of different models out there. I was an early fan of what Ella Butt did in Bangladesh and then was copied by Muhammad Yunus, who everyone calls the father of microfinance, but it's really Ella, who was the one who was there first.
A woman.
Yeah, of course. Erased. And so part of the stuff is the microfinance, like smaller amounts of money, but like the real thing with microfinance was the community of women supporting each other. But I thought like even broader, not just the entrepreneurs dividing that up, but what if the whole community was there as a resource? And then part of my thing was, if you want women to be funded, you have to have women writing checks. How do you get women writing checks? The existing risk model is really problematic. Writing a $50,000 check on something that you have no idea if it's going to work or not, I just thought didn't fit with a lot of the women that I knew. And so it was, how could you dip your toe in to try something? Small amount of money. And then we made it a gift instead of a loan that you get back, because we wanted people to go on a journey of like, you have no power here. We wanted to really disrupt power. And so when you come into this, anything that happens after you've given the money is like a bonus. Oh, they're successful. Great. I feel like I'm part of their success. If it's not, you won't get your money back anyway. So it sort of like takes all of those stakes off the table, because even if you just put in $1,000 and then wanted to get your money back, you're sitting on top of that entrepreneur all the time. Is she doing it right? I don't like her strategy. Her marketing plan doesn't work. I have a better idea, like nightmare. So I was like, take all that stuff out and have all of us get into this trusting relationship with an entrepreneur and support them to do this their way and only be able to use our influence in relationship as opposed to power with money. And it's blown people's minds because the ventures are like unbelievably successful when you trust them to do it their way. They feel supported, which never happens when it comes to money and investment in entrepreneurs. Someone's always giving you rules for how you can spend it. We don't. And so I think there's a lot of pieces like that. It's all very decolonizing and deconditioning our way of this, like power and money disruption thing is a really big deal.
What are you seeing in terms of how they do things differently because of your funding model relative to maybe what they do in the mainstream?
Literally every venture is different. Like an example from the very beginning, we had a venture who had this really cool alternative to plastic wrap that keeps food alive. So it allows food to breathe. It's called Abigo. We thought this was just a really amazing product. The community voted for it. And then the first thing she wanted to do with her money was do rebranding and fix her packaging. And we're like, really? Aren't there like 10 other things you could be doing? Because of course, as experts who've done this before, and the coaches and myself, whatever, and she was totally right. It just popped and did really well. And so part of the conditioning here that we see is sometimes what doesn't feel right to you as an outsider looking in, what if actually the entrepreneur who's passionate about this, whose livelihood depends on it, who is living with it every day, has a better idea than someone who has the money does? We're just not set up in the world that way. We're set up for someone with the money sets the rules for how you're allowed to do things, which is all based on past evidence, which then guarantees you're only going to get more of the past. So a lot of our ventures are doing things really unconventionally. They don't want to do traditional marketing. They don't want to do things in a way that you have seen be successful and you want them to do because it's a new model. They're trying different things. And we are literally here to find those different approaches. There's a number of our ventures are just absolutely consumed with like zero waste and like gold standard around sustainability. And so they will leave money on the table in order to be better citizens of the world, which investors would tell them not to do. And they pay better than living wage because they want to be good citizens locally supporting people. And so like, there's a whole bunch of things like this that are not normal business practice because we're here to maximize profits according to like the rules of the game. They break those rules all the time.
To what extent are they able to leverage the activators themselves? Because they're smart women, I imagine.
Yeah, that's our special sauce, the whole ecosystem that you literally get hundreds of people on your team when you are selected as a venture. All of a sudden, all these people want to help you. So they voted for you. So that's part of the thing. Like in the way that we do funding and stuff right now, a small expert group will determine who's got the greatest potential based on market conditions and trends and blah, blah, blah. The way that we do it is hundreds of different voices look at something. And the questions are, would you buy or recommend this product or service? That's the main one, because all of a sudden, if 250 women vote for a company because they want to become your customer and open doors for you, all your conditions change as a business. Your future is totally different than it was before. So it's almost like a different way of doing market validation. And then you have the passion of all these people who feel like they're on your team. And so they want to support and they talk to their friends and they're your marketing team, they're your advisors, they're your influencers, customers, et cetera.
So you have all this huge body of activators who have the skills, and then you have all of these ventures for it. Yeah. How do you make that an efficient interaction? Do you assign specific teams, or how does that work?
No, that's like one of the ways that most incubators, accelerators, portfolios do that is they say, here's our expert for retail. But I've been part of a lot of these incubators before and experimented with them previously. And one of the challenges is that because a lot of our ventures are doing things differently, they have a certain values orientation. So you could have someone who's like amazing, retail expert and blah, 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 but they just don't jive with the entrepreneur. I'm not going to make them do that. But that's what most accelerators do. They're like, this is the person, follow what they did. But like that, again, only gets you more of what that person experienced as being success. And we're in a time which is super different right now. The economy and where we need to go in the world is not doing more of the past. So it's very organic. And we do this, we have an app, an Ask Give app. And so you're able to just go into your app, ask for support, and then activators respond organically in real time when they have time. And then we have a group of activators, a circle, who are constantly animating those and making sure that they're tagging people as kind of super connector folks. So, and then we have that process attached to all of our calls. When we do our Zoom calls regularly, there's always an Ask Give component. So you're bumping into people in a breakout room, 4 or 5 people on every call you come to, meeting new people. And we call this like hashtag SheEO magic all the time, because you're like, wait a minute, I just asked for that. And the person who has the answers in this room, what? It's so surprising, but this is a reminder to all of us that all the time we have people around us who have gifts to give to us if we'd only ask. And we're not really conditioned to do that. And we're not designed to do that in most of our systems, to ask for help.
So one other question from the funding model. So clearly, not all business models succeed and not all ventures succeed. How do you experience that within the SheEO model, and what happens to the money and the businesses that don't turn out to be successful?
Well, they just don't turn out to be successful. I mean, we do all kinds of things to support along the way. So we're quite flexible with our loan repayments. If things happen during COVID, we, of course, had all kinds of pivots going on and stuff. So we're really flexible about that. Again, everything we do is based on radical generosity. So what's the radically generous way of giving loans when people have tough times? So we're flex on that. We don't really care if it's paid back in 5 years. It's a made up number anyway. So that's one thing. The other piece is when there's a challenge that a venture's in and they're like really stuck and they need a pivot and they need there are coaches available in our community, but we also have a list of all the activators who voted for each of these ventures. And so we form a circle around them sometimes to make sure that they're getting the support that they need. But also the last thing people need when they're in trouble is 14 people telling them 14 different things. So we're quite curated about who are the experts that have a values alignment here that can help. But we do quite a bit of heavy lifting around these kinds of things. And we take a lot of care. We don't just write it off and go, great, they failed quickly, next. That's not why we're here. We're trying to create the conditions for everyone to thrive. And every once in a while, things just don't work.
And as you're putting these circles together, you talk in your book about how you learn the most when you face the most strong or the most opinionated people. Have you brought that into your model?
We don't have to bring it in because people are people. It's there naturally. People will make a comment. I've had these things happen in the past where an activator's like, I reached out to so-and-so to help her and she didn't get back to me. I'm like, great, it's working perfectly. And they're like, but I want to help her. And I'm like, and she doesn't want to receive your help. Next. We really do trust people to be grown-ups. Just because you contributed capital and you're an activator doesn't mean you get to say, I know it all and push it on people. Like giving and receiving is a in-breath and the out-breath. And so there needs to be a full circle on that. It can't just be giving without someone wanting to receive.
One of the things I noticed is that the people who are eligible have to be having positive revenue. One of the biggest barriers for women entrepreneurs is even to get to the first step and start something. I know that they don't qualify, and I know you have your model for a reason. What advice or what do you think you would tell women who are yet pre-revenue to get to the point where they could even qualify for a SheEO or just being in business?
The big thing that's happened with us in the past 5 years is almost like we flipped our model. So it started with this place of people who had resources, were sharing it with those who were applying. What's happened now is if you're not yet at $50,000 in revenue, as a venture, or if you even have an idea or something, activate, get into the community. It's the best way to build your business, to grow your revenue, to find the resources you need to then apply. So we're starting to see now that our ventures are activators. Like, it's $92, the equivalent of $92 a month. It's the cheapest business development you are ever going to do. It's the cheapest school you're ever going to find, because you're going to find people who did it before you, who want to share it and just help you. You don't have to go take a course from someone else. Everything is available in this community. And then when you're ready, they're the customers who helped you along the way, who now want you to be successful. So we've seen people come in and dramatically grow their businesses, apply, and then they get selected because they're in relationship with everybody, because now people know them and say, oh, she's amazing. She's been working on this for 2 years. And then your business starts to grow. So it's really like the business development and the growth and the way to build your business, not like you have to be ready to apply here. Just come in anytime.
So it's almost like a complete circle. There's no beginning, there's no end. There's just constant, hopefully an upward spiral that's at play.
Yeah,
all
exactly.
the time. Obviously, you're seeing a lot of growth. I saw some of the numbers in the impact report. What trends are you seeing in terms of the types of businesses and people who apply, as well as the ones who are getting voted? How has that changed over time?
So we sort of have 4 kind of segments of our ventures now that we're sort of looking at for patterns across it. And so we have a group that are very much focused on systems transformation and have very new models to like break deep barriers that we have in our systems, to rethink healthcare, to rethink supporting people with disabilities, a whole bunch of things around that. And then we have a group that are like sort of sustainable products and services that are going to help us get to the new world. Some are scale up, some are small. Then we have a crew that are what we would sort of call inclusion, but they're businesses that are about including people in the economy who have really been systematically excluded. And then a 4th group is sort of tech systems solutions. So those are kind of 4 categories that we're seeing. It's always a tricky thing to categorize anything at SheEO, because all of us think we're so different that we always click the other box. When government sends me the list of, are they in manufacturing or are they this? I'm like, oh, you're just going to hate us, because we never answer those questions. Like even SheEO, what is SheEO? Are we a community? Are we a school? Are we a funding network? Are we in finance? Are we like, what are we? And there's never an all the above. It's just an other box. And I'm like typing in all the things. So we get that a lot ourselves too, because we really are looking for these new models that take a much more holistic approach.
And in terms of the scalability, do activators, have they shown a preference for more or less scalable businesses? And do ventures change their view to scalability once they get into your ecosystem?
Yeah, you have such great questions. You're amazing.
Thank you.
So ventures do change their perspective both ways. Some come in and they were dreaming a small amount when they first came in, and their dreams start to really grow when they realize there's just all the resources are kind of around them if they ask. And so lots of them get more bold. And then another form of boldness is saying during COVID and everything else, the cost for me to scale this business is to be in a deeper relationship with an Amazon. And I don't like their practices, and it's predatory, and I don't want to participate in that realm. So I'm going to decide to stay more small and local and build locally, to have a kind of business that works for me and is like, I'm going to have a $2 to $3 million business, hire people and pay them really well, be rooted locally, and reduce my stress. Right. And so we're seeing both. And then we're seeing some that are like, oh my God, I'm going to the moon. This is amazing. I have so many resources here. So we see all of that. And then your first question was?
Are you seeing a preference on the part of activators in terms of scalable versus non-scalable?
This is like so interesting. Our activators are so wildly diverse. I will walk in and look at things and I'll be like, I like 5 of these, maybe. And out of like 25 that you're voting for. And others would be like, I couldn't decide. I loved everybody. And I'm like, what? We all have such different perspectives, right? And so there isn't a single way of being an activator. There isn't a singular perspective. This idea of like collective intelligence being smarter than individual expert niche experience is fascinating to me. I'm always blown away every year by what we end up selecting and what I think sometimes about those ventures. And then when I watch those ventures really perform much differently than I thought they would. And I've just learned over and over that When you're in a sort of isolated, non-connected, low-resourced space as an entrepreneur before you come here, and when you walk through the door into a place where everybody wants to help, where you have really, really good strategic advice and you feel supported, the conditions are just so dramatically different that you can't tell who's going to be successful or not. And in fact, someone said to me once, like, actually, any failure in our community is a failure of our community, not of the venture. Right? It's a failure of us not supporting them. We really do believe that anyone can be successful, pivot, change, whatever. If you're coachable and you're open and you watch what's happening around you, you should be able to be successful no matter what in an environment that is designed to support you and your goals. So
oxygen rich, right?
Yeah, oxygen rich. Beautiful.
Is there like one story that stands out in your mind of somebody who came in and became something so completely different that you just can't forget?
There's a lot of individual activator stories of people who are like, I saw this thing, I just signed up. What is it again? And all of a sudden they're like, oh my God, this is the community I've been waiting for. So we hear a lot of things from people about, this is a place where I was really able to sort of show up as my full self for the first time. We have such a like age diversity, racial diversity, sector diversity, geographic, like, and the vibe across it, all of it is like people show up with this spirit of radical generosity. So you're listened to. No one's like necessarily disagreeing with you. It's like, oh, isn't that interesting? How can I help you? What can, you know? So the vibe around that is a beautiful sort of stew to decide who you want to be in the world and you play with it. You know, we've seen ventures show up who had like maxed out all their credit cards, were in a world of pain, got selected, were like in an emotionally incredibly fragile state, having just been picked at so much by everyone before they, like one of our ventures, she talks about how like this literally saved her life. She was in just such a terrible, terrible place. And all of a sudden being validated by this community and everybody saying, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. Having heard that for the first time after like 6 years of struggling doing prototypes. And she grew from just over $50,000 to $4.2 million in revenue in 4 years. And really credits the community with like holding her as an inventor and saving her. And she's now giving back to the community so much more. So we like very moving personal stories, a lot of stuff during COVID where people just pivoted all over the place. We had someone who was designing this like sort of high-end fashion clothing with really unique fabrics. And in COVID switched to scrubs, really interesting PPE with a fashion sense with this like really cool materials so that now the scrubs, they stretch, they're absolutely beautifully designed. And is wildly growing that business because she just realized, why am I doing this? I need to do something that matters. So she took that fashion thing and put it into healthcare. So all kinds of neat things, 110 ventures so far and 110 different stories.
I'm going to pivot a little bit to finance. And in the book, what I really liked was there was a chapter about self-limiting beliefs and how you should get over them. And some of the research shows that finance is an area where there's a lot of self-limiting beliefs for women. So my question is, what have you found most effective, or what would you recommend for women to get over these self-limiting beliefs, especially around finance, revenue, price setting?
The challenge with a lot of this work is that you have to do you first. If you don't feel like you're worthy, you can't set a price for your product that's worthy. With a lot of these things, you have to do your own personal work to center yourself and ground yourself in who you are and what your value is. Because if you don't do that, it shows up in your product, right? Your team equals your product. Whoever's presenting that to the world, all that stuff shows up in the design of what you're doing. A lot of stuff that we talk about at SheEO is that you need to recognize what your limiting beliefs are and work on those intensely while you're doing your business so that your business can thrive. The person and the business are connected.
And to the person who may not be fortunate enough to get into SheEO, what would that look like in your view?
Oh, I think there's tons of resources and opportunities out there, like understanding how you present yourself. Do you present yourself with confidence or not? And if you don't, you get what you present. I think there's MJ Ryan, who is one of the guides. She has a lot of books. She's written 13 different books. They're all phenomenal. So I would highly recommend reading some of her books because they're exceptional. Anyone who wants to be an activator in our community, we're just about to start 4 tracks where we're doing unlearning sessions, essentially around finance, around mindset, around systems, and around how to run businesses in different ways. So we're kind of getting more into the school side of things because we'd like to have more and more innovative business ideas coming our way. And most of the ways that we're teaching people to do business are like really old school, not serving us anymore. So we have to update how we're doing that. So we're getting into the business of doing that essentially, because we know that the more that we spend on transforming ourselves, the more that we can actually transform systems.
So there's an internal piece, which I completely get, but there's also an external piece. There's documented bias, especially in the financial world. Organizations like yours are a very, very big part, and I'm a huge admirer. What advice would you give somebody who's facing objective bias in the real world of finance?
Oh, it's like a big question. It depends on what your level of ability is to walk away. I think a lot of people are sort of trapped in a lot of systems that don't serve them and harm them. I'm doing a session tonight with a bunch of kids under 17 with business ideas. The more that you can understand the conditions that you need to be able to thrive and put yourself in places where those conditions exist, the more successful you'll be. If you're in a place that doesn't value you, there's very little you can do to break that if you can't quit your job. Like pointing it out to your boss who's biased. I know there's some strategies around that, but it's challenging, right? And I think increasingly it appears as if we're in a market where labor has more power than we've had for a while because employers are really struggling. I think being clear on what your boundaries are and what you need is important, but the biases are just absolutely exhausting that exist around us all the time. I have done so much work and I really know where to put myself in good situations. And I found myself again last week in a conversation where I was just like, I just got trapped again. The system is so genius at oppressing. Essentially, it really just is unbelievable to get you to think you can't get what you want. All of the things that we do to slice and dice, it's really painful. So I think being aware of some of those things and just being really clear on doing what you can to put yourself in a position to be in an environment that is not harmful.
And from a financing perspective, right, if you're an entrepreneur, no matter what, there are chances that you're going to need money from outside. So whether it's SheEO is not a problem, but if you're going to a bank or if you're going to a venture capitalist, you've raised funds, you mentioned, across all these.
Everything.
So what are your learnings where you could show up and be effective against these objective biases in the world of financial services?
Yeah, well, again, you have to really come with an abundance mindset and know that somewhere out there are people that have your values and to go towards those. So we have a venture who told this great story. I put it up on LinkedIn, a little video last week. She's going out to raise $600,000. And she started with a narrative. She has a great business, good numbers, strong story. She was all ready to go. But she walked in by saying, here's why I probably don't fit with you. And she just said all the reasons why, because she was trying to get to a no more quickly. Because funders, except for banks, venture people, angels, et cetera, they don't say no. They're just like, not yet. Do these 4 things. And then you come back and you've done those 4 things. And you're like, and then do these 6 things. It's an endless, painful thing. You'd much rather someone say, no, not a fit. So you can move on, because otherwise it wastes so much time. So she really came in with here's what I'm going to do. You're not going to get your money back in 5 years. It's not going to be a 10X. I'm going to pay people more than is the living wage. And I'm going to probably pay them more. If you don't like that, too bad. That's what I'm doing. And so she actually oversubscribed and everyone's like, that's amazing. It's like the power pose of walking in and assuming that you'll get lots of no's. That's fine. But if you don't break that power dynamic with your investor and get into a really good values-based alignment, you are mostly led by the people who have the money. They're going to lead you, and you may not be able to do stuff your way. I can't really state this enough, because I think, especially in the world that we're living in right now, everyone thinks they have to raise money. And I just want to step back for a moment and go, the most free you can be is to bootstrap. Go get customers and be in charge of all of it and not have someone telling you what to do. I find it fascinating that one of the first acts anyone with an idea does when they're starting a business is to go try and find an owner so they're not in control anymore. Why do we do that? It's so crazy. It's nuts. Oh, great. I'm free. I'm an entrepreneur. I have this great idea. Let me go find someone who's going to try and tell me what to do all the time. That's what you do when you get an investor. Anyway.
Fantastic. I love it. It's kind of like your client when you told them, I'm going to do this, this, and this. You talked about in your book, the story is to put together that agenda that you talked about, to recall. Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
So, you talked a lot, or you did a lot of work earlier on about youth and entrepreneurship. And one of the trends we're seeing today, at least in the United States, is that women over 50 are the second fastest growing demographic of entrepreneurs. What advice do you have for women over 40, let's say, to become entrepreneurs, especially when they face age barriers?
I mean, the number one thing I say to any entrepreneurs, no matter what age, is get in a community of other entrepreneurs. Surround yourself with other entrepreneurs, learn from them, share your pain, ask them what they did. This kind of stuff is like really important. I think if you're surrounded by entrepreneurs, it's super helpful. Women over 50, I have no advice for them. They know what they're doing. They're amazing. They've lived through this crazy world. If they're going to start a business over 50, they're solid and incredible, and I'll write them a check. Like, that's what you do, right?
I'm going to take that video and slap it across the
Go
top.
for it. Absolutely. Because it's just like, I don't know a single person over 50 who's clueless about what they're doing. None of them. Like, if you're going to do this, you're like, you have good social network, you probably have some capital, and you have lots of resources available to you, and you know what not to do probably already. So, yeah.
You've talked a lot about the SheEO model, and I'm clearly bought in. Are there other viable models? It's clearly not everyone can do this. What's your thoughts on other viable models to jumpstart entrepreneurship among women in general?
I think we're one example, one experiment, one pathway of doing things. I'm kind of blown away by the power of this concept of the ecosystem, like to have all these resources in one community. It's very rare that you have entrepreneurs and investors and advisors in the same community. The way the world is organized, we're all separate from each other. And so to have everything in one, and then have all of us get to understand each other and understand the challenges that we're facing so we can help each other. However this design came through me, I'm so thrilled for it, because that's just amazing. Depending on what you're looking for, it's kind of like hammer nail. If you're looking for a VC, there's tons of VCs out there. If you're looking for an angel, there's lots of angels out there. Go to Twitter, find the lists, reach out, talk to people. There's lots more communities emerging because people are really starting to understand the power of community. Super hard to do this stuff alone. Banks have their place. And we've seen a lot of innovation emerging in the fintech space around financing for e-com companies that have customers that have sort of like set revenues that they can borrow against that to help with their cash flow when they can't get lines of credit in the early days. I think there's quite a bit of innovation going on, and we need a lot more, especially for those who have been systematically excluded. So women, non-binary folk, Black, Indigenous people of color, like, it's painful to get funded. The data and the numbers are so hard. So we're going to need people to experiment, because the systems are not going to solve this. It's just, they're designed for a totally different thing.
So I'm hearing that it starts with the community. So you start building the community, and then you attract or generate the kind of innovations that you need to serve this community that has typically been underserved in the past.
Totally, 100%. And it's really hard to build community. I've just built the muscle of doing this my whole life. I think one of the key things is to not serve everyone. So be very clear. Like, we had this thing, it's an act of radical generosity, like join, and your capital is a gift in. That weeded out a ton of people who are here to take. There are lots of people who are like, what is this? What? I gift my money and I don't get to choose where it goes. I don't like that model. And I'm like, bye. Just, don't try and convince anyone. Get very aligned on what you're here to do, who your audience is, what matters most, and then pile forward. If you think of the long tail, there's now like 7 billion people. The majority are online. There's an audience for what you're going to do your way. It's just, don't try and be too many things to too many people.
And in the early days, how did you find all these people? Did you already have the network?
No. I thought I did. I had a really big network, but lots of those people didn't show up. It's been a fascinating journey, and it's been really the hardest thing I've ever done, I have to say. And I've done a lot of hard things, because the mindset to step into SheEO is like, give up your power, give up a little bit of capital, not know what the outcome's going to be, and trust. That's what it takes to walk in the dark. That's what it took at the beginning, because it was imagine that this makes sense when it didn't make sense to lots of people. A 0% interest loan, what's that? And now we've got tons and tons of stories, and it's still really hard for people to give themselves permission to come into a community. Like, imagine coming into the community like this, and the first thing everyone's going to say to you is, how can I help you and what do you need? Most people don't think that they're worthy of receiving that. It's just because we've been so conditioned to think, oh, well, she's in that community. I'm not like her. She's amazing. I better spend another 3 years trying to get better before I step in. And I'm like, honey, the way to get better is to actually step in before you're ready. That's the way, because then it's easier. Everyone's ready if you pick yourself. But I also recognize that way back in my 20s or 30s, if something like this existed, I'm not sure I would have put myself into that space because I really didn't have a lot of confidence. And I thought there were all kinds of things wrong with me because I believed what everyone told me, all the things, you should do this, you should do that, you're not ready, blah, blah, blah. And when you hear too much of that, it just takes over and then you really don't think you're great. So
how do you break that then?
Yeah, I don't know. Will you tell me when you figure that out? Because we haven't figured it out.
That's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, no, I know it's being invitational with beautiful hospitality. It's you matter. You are welcome here. We have these global activation calls for people to come and experience it a little bit because it is not what you normally experience in a day. This is a very different kind of way of being together in community. It sounds a little bit too good to be true. You could walk in here and maybe peep and ask, but with like no confidence or anything. And maybe someone doesn't help and you're like, see, I told you this isn't real. You have to kind of like step in and trust and suspend your disbelief and go find a buddy if you need them to help you along on the way to like stepping into it. It can be scary. We continue to storytell what's happening here as permission space for people to come, and they will come when they're ready.
Your big focus is working on the world's to-do list, which is linked to the Sustainable Development Goals from the UN. So let's say there's a woman who wants to start a business that's not explicitly linked. So let's say she wants to start a payment processing firm. There's no direct link to SheEO, but then there's also no direct link to an SDG, but it's a pretty legitimate business.
Yeah. So come in and be an activator and get support to grow your business and find the other people that are working on similar things like this to get support. You don't have to be a SheEO, like a venture that's selected, that's funded to get help in this community. We're all helping each other all the time.
So you're saying I could, somebody who's like this could come in as an activator and still get help for their business.
Yeah. I mean, this is all the thing. You use the Ask Give app. You ask for help. People show up to help you. There are tons of people building businesses that don't fit in the world to-do list in our community. They're all helping each other.
Oh, wow. Okay, cool. I'm learning a lot.
Yeah. Come and join us. It'll be fun.
I will do my best. What advice would you give to women entrepreneurs, just based on your own experience, how they should approach the financial side of entrepreneurship based on everything you've learned, what has worked within your ventures and your community?
Yeah. I mean, the number one thing for me is just like bootstrap. Really, like the best way to get funding is to get a customer. Build your ability to charismatically get people to follow you or find a partner who's really good at that. I think we're at we need so much leadership for new ideas to solve a lot of challenges we're facing right now. And however you're going to use your leadership, please just do it, whatever it is, just lead. We need you. And so I think that from a funding perspective, the easiest / most free way is to go get customers. You could maybe go get investors. It's like the same challenges again, right? You have to go find an investor. It's like getting married. You're going to be with this person for a while. They have a lot of say in your life. So make sure you like them and they're aligned with your vision.
Got it. And you talk in the book about finding resources. You said there are billions of dollars that are looking for places to invest in, especially for women and girls. And I know Catalyst at Large, which is now the name of the women, that's one resource. Are there other resources that you can point out that you're aware of that would help?
Yeah, I would go to gendersmartinvesting.com. They just put out alongside one of the universities in the state, Wharton. They just put out a report on all of the gender lens investing funds globally across all the asset classes. So it's an excellent resource.
So even if you're like a starting small bootstrap entrepreneur,
you can find it on their website. The other person who's really good at this is Jackie Zahner, and she's got an unbelievable list on her website. She's got a lot of all these reports, mapping the movement, lots of good stuff.
Excellent. So last question for today. If there's one thing that you want to leave any woman entrepreneur anywhere in the world with to make their venture a success, what would you tell them?
Go find a community that fits with your values and get in relationship with others. It makes everything easier. Do not do it alone.
Thank you. My conversation with Vicki was fascinating on so many levels. The first is that the funding and the mentoring or advice become so smoothly blended together that it's hard to tell where the value is coming from, or even from whom it's coming. I suspect that this ends up with both parties getting more out of the equation, whether they're the funders or the funded. The second is the organization's focus on the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Is there opportunity for us as entrepreneurs to create similar thematic community circles, whether they are in our industry or local geography, even without the funding aspect? How would that work? And how can we make them effective? And of course, I love how SheEO flips the whole incubator model on its head, because paying less than $100 a month is similar to being in an incubator, but you're funding entrepreneurs too, which is a really cool concept, come to think of it. Is this the model of an incubator one you'd consider joining yourself? I think it's an important question to think about in your own entrepreneurial journey. Thank you for listening to today's episode. Find show notes and more at achieve.co. That's achiiv.co/podcast. Like what you heard? Hit subscribe on Spotify, Apple, or Google Podcast and never miss another episode. Want to help others like you? Leave us a review and tell a friend. See you on the next episode. Now, go achieve.